in the news. Prime Minister Mark Carney, of course, announcing a new $1.2 billion aid package for Canada's softwood lumber industry. Now, the news comes just after the U.S. government announced an increase in anti-dumping duties on the sector, going from 7 to just over 20%.
Billions of dollars a month of softwood lumber now jammed up at 35% tariff.
When President Trump raised tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber to 35% at the start of August, the decision was presented as a bold measure to restore American industry. Yet the reality is more complex. Canadian lumber makes up the majority of wood used in American housing construction, and this is not a product that the U.S. can replace overnight. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, Canadian softwood lumber has consistently supplied well over 3/4 of U.S. imports during the past decade. Every extra duty imposed raises the cost of building homes, schools, and even furniture. At a moment when mortgage rates remain high, this added burden risks pushing more families out of the housing market. For builders already facing tight margins, the tariff is not just a trade measure. It is a direct hit to the cost of doing business.
Now Canada is lifting some of these retaliatory tariffs, as you know. The government is actually alleviating some of the pressure on the U.S.
Prime Minister Mark Carney chose not to respond in kind across the board. Ottawa removed most retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, while keeping steel, aluminum, and autos protected. Some viewed this as a retreat, but it was in fact a calculated defense. Canada highlighted the true pressure point, softwood lumber. The United States cannot simply cut Canada out of the market because domestic production falls far short of national demand. Alternative suppliers in Europe or South America cannot match Canada's scale or logistical advantage. This reality makes Trump's strategy a gamble that hits his own voters as much as his northern neighbor. For Ottawa, the decision to step back on lesser items while holding the line on critical sectors underscored that Canada is not fighting blindly. It is protecting leverage where it matters most, using economic facts rather than political noise. Domestically, Carney's choice reflects political and economic realities. He leads a minority government, meaning every move is under the microscope of opposition leaders. Critics, including Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, argue that easing tariffs weakens Canada's hand. But Carney's strategy aligns with the advice of premiers and industry leaders. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has already warned that Trump could reopen SUSMA as early as November, 2 years before the scheduled 2026 review. That looming threat makes it vital for Canada to demonstrate stability now. By pursuing progress on softwood lumber, Carney can deliver relief for Canadian forestry communities and reduce costs for U.S. consumers, a win-win that strengthens his position at home. The decision also positions Canada as a responsible actor, willing to de-escalate without sacrificing its core interests. It is an approach that values patience and timing, elements often overlooked in trade battles that dominate headlines.
Softwood lumber is not just another trade issue. It has become the symbol of how Canada responds to American pressure. Trump set the stage by raising tariffs, but the structure of North American supply chains limits how far Washington can push. Canada has shown that it can adapt, choosing when to ease tensions and when to defend its most vital industries. Far from capitulation, this is a sign of resilience. By using lumber as the test case, Ottawa has proved it can protect workers, defend national interests, and still present itself as a credible partner. The outcome will shape not only the price of homes across America, but also the credibility of Canada's strategy as it approaches the all-important USMCA review in 2026. In this fight, Canada is not bending. It is showing that leverage, wisely used, is more powerful than tariffs shouted from a podium.
All right, so in Quebec, there is a bunch of American alcohol that's going bad.
The Quebec Liquor Board is getting ready to destroy $300,000 worth of American wine, I believe it is.
At the start of 2025, Donald Trump expanded his use of tariffs, presenting them as a sharp tool to win concessions abroad. Among the sectors caught in this new wave of trade retaliation was American alcohol. In February, after Washington imposed emergency tariffs on Canadian goods, Ottawa and the provinces fired back. Quebec, in particular, ordered its state-run liquor board to pull every American product from store shelves. From bourbon to California wine, the message was clear. If Trump wanted to weaponize trade, Canada would not be a silent target. What followed was a standoff that showed how a provincial decision could ripple through cross-border commerce, turning a presidential decree into a costly headache for American producers. The numbers illustrate the impact. Roughly $27 million worth of American alcohol has been sitting idle in Quebec's warehouses since early March. According to CTV News, about $300,000 worth of that stock reached its expiry window this summer. Initially, officials prepared to destroy the goods, a move that sparked public frustration about waste and fiscal responsibility. Facing criticism, the province changed course and announced the products would be donated to hospitality schools and community organizations. Items such as boxed wine, rosé, and ready-to-drink cocktails were redirected to educational use rather than poured down the drain. In practice, Quebec absorbed the short-term costs of storage and lost sales, yet the choice also demonstrated resilience. Instead of allowing Trump's tariffs to dictate the terms, the province turned unsellable stock into an opportunity to strengthen local institutions and protect domestic producers.
Now into the troubles facing the American wine industry in the face of President Trump's tariffs. And some wineries are telling NBC News they may not come back from this trade war.
The American alcohol sector has not escaped unscathed. The Distilled Spirits Council of the United States reported in August that U.S. exports to Canada plunged by more than 60% in the first half of 2025. Shipments fell from 114 million to just 43.4 million, with spirits down 62% and wine down 67%. That drop translates into losses of hundreds of millions for American producers, many of whom counted Canada as their second largest export market. Smaller distillers have been particularly vulnerable. Without access to provincial liquor boards, their distribution channels have collapsed almost overnight, leaving warehouses full of unsold inventory. Trade groups warn that job losses in bottling, distribution, and hospitality could accelerate if the standoff drags on into next year. Meanwhile, Canadian labels filled the gap. The Quebec government confirmed that local wine and spirit sales jumped between 30% and 60% since March, a surge that has created new opportunities for regional vineyards and craft distilleries. Retailers report that consumers have adapted quickly, often choosing Canadian substitutes without hesitation. What looked at first like a defensive measure has in fact reinforced Canada's domestic industry. Rather than fold under pressure, Canada redirected consumer demand, shielding its market while American exporters carried the heaviest burden of the tariff war. The broader lesson is that tariffs are not a one-sided weapon. Trump sought to squeeze Canada by raising duties, but the countermeasures show a different story. Ottawa and the provinces demonstrated that they could bear the immediate strain in order to protect long-term independence. Quebec's decision to pull American alcohol, despite the costs, underlined that Canada would not allow foreign tariffs to define its domestic shelves. From Ottawa's trade reset to Quebec's stand, the message to Washington is consistent. Canada is prepared to absorb losses today if it means defending its sovereignty tomorrow. American distillers now face shrinking exports, while Canadian producers and retailers adapt and expand. In this contest, the balance of pressure does not rest solely in the White House. It is shared, and Canada has proven it can carry its share with determination. Trump may have fired the opening shot with tariffs, but Canada's response has turned the dispute into a test of endurance, one that shows the country is neither passive nor powerless.
Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke with U.S. President Donald Trump on the phone today, weeks after blowing past the August 1st deadline for a trade deal.
The leaders discussed current trade challenges, opportunities, and shared priorities in a new economic and security relationship between Canada and the U.S. The leaders
After weeks of silence, Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Donald Trump finally spoke by phone. Ottawa described the conversation as substantive and productive, focused on trade challenges, new economic priorities, and Ukraine. Washington gave no statement, reinforcing the sense of imbalance. Still, the fact that they spoke matters. It was the first contact since Trump's August 1st deadline passed without a deal, triggering a 35% tariff on Canadian goods outside CUSMA and a 50% duty on steel and aluminum. The call comes as Trump pushes a disruptive style of negotiation. Earlier this month, the United States extended 50% tariffs not only on metals, but on more than 400 industrial products containing steel, from cranes to rail cars, even though these items were nominally covered under CUSMA. The message was unmistakable. Trump is willing to stretch rules and keep the threat of leaving CUSMA on the table. But tariffs bring costs at home. Walmart recently warned of higher prices feeding through supply chains. In April, the Yale Budget Lab estimated that the 2025 tariff package would raise U.S. consumer prices by 2.3%, equal to about $3,800 per household using 2024 prices. In July, the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco projected that if tariffs remain high, U.S. real incomes could decline by about 0.4% by 2028. The Center for Automotive Research in Michigan also cautioned that a 25% tariff on autos and parts could add $108 billion to industry costs this year. These figures show that disruption abroad is also a strain at home. For Canada, the challenge is immense, but it is not helpless. Carney has resisted calls to match Trump's every move, choosing instead a strategy of patience while holding on to powerful cards. Energy remains the most obvious. In 2024, Canada exported close to 4 million barrels of crude oil per day to the United States, by far America's largest source of imports. Natural gas shipments were more than 8 billion cubic feet per day, and Canada supplied roughly 27% of all uranium used in U.S. nuclear power plants. These are dependencies that Washington cannot easily replace. Canada also holds an advantage in critical minerals. Nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements mined north of the border are essential for electric vehicles and defense supply chains. And despite the new tariffs, about 85% of bilateral trade still moves duty-free under CUSMA, giving Canadian exporters a core of stability while disputes play out. Ottawa has also been selective in retaliation. In March, it applied 25% tariffs on 30 billion Canadian dollars worth of American goods, targeting consumer products like beverages, food items, and motorcycles, pressure points designed to hit politically sensitive constituencies in the United States.
The readout also says Carney and Trump agreed to talk again soon.
Looking forward, 3 paths are possible. One is a framework similar to those signed with the UK, Japan, and South Korea, where tariffs were capped around 10 to 15% in exchange for investment pledges and purchases. Another is for Canada to use energy and minerals more directly in talks, offering stable access in return for tariff relief. A third is legal and structural, from pursuing cases under CUSMA and the WTO to diversifying exports toward Europe and Asia. None of these paths guarantee immediate relief, but they underline that Canada is not without leverage. Trump remains central, but Carney has shown he will not rush into a bad deal. The recent call did not solve the trade standoff, yet it marked the beginning of the next phase, where endurance and strategy will decide how North America's 2 closest partners manage one of their most volatile economic relationships in decades.